Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're navigating straight into one of the most infamous, most talked about regions on the entire planet, the Bermuda Triangle. For decades, this massive stretch of the Atlantic Ocean has inspired wild theories, endless debates, and honestly, some genuine fear. So we're going to separate the verified historical evidence from the swirling speculation and try to get to the absolute bottom of this maritime enigma.
Look, when massive historic ships, passenger aircraft, and heavily armed military flights seemingly just vanish inside this region without a single trace, our minds naturally race to the extraordinary. It's human nature. But, as focused learners, we really have to ask ourselves, are we genuinely looking at a true, unexplainable paranormal mystery here? Or, in our rush to embrace the fantastic, are we simply overlooking the harsh, scientific facts of the natural world? Well, by the end of this explainer, you're going to have the exact framework you need to answer that question for yourself.
Okay, let's dive into this by establishing exactly where our so-called crime scene is. If we're going to investigate these disappearances, we first need to map the territory. The Bermuda Triangle generally connects three distinct points: Miami, Florida, the island of Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. And we aren't just talking about a tiny patch of water here. This is a sprawling expanse of roughly 500,000 square miles of deep, open ocean. When you really think about that immense scale, the logistics of finding a single lost ship or aircraft suddenly become overwhelmingly complex. It's like finding a needle in a haystack if the haystack was the size of a massive country.
To truly understand the triangle, we have to trace the history of the lore itself. Now, you might think this is just a modern internet conspiracy, but it actually traces its earliest origins all the way back to 1492. During his very first voyage across the Atlantic, Christopher Columbus famously recorded erratic compass readings and observed strange lights in this exact area. That really planted the earliest seeds of the legend. However, the modern myth didn't start taking shape until the 1950s, when early reports of strange maritime disappearances began making headlines. Then the 1970s hit, and the legend absolutely exploded into a global cultural phenomenon.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer caliber of the vessels involved. We aren't dealing with rumors of tiny sailboats getting lost in a storm. No, these are heavily documented historical tragedies. Take the famous Flight 19, for example, where 5 Navy bombers carrying 14 men vanished completely in 1945. Or massive naval ships like the USS Cyclops, which disappeared with over 300 men aboard. Add in civilian passenger aircraft like the Star Tiger and the Star Ariel, plus heavily engineered cargo ships like the Marine Sulphur Queen. It's exactly this list of fully crewed, massive, historic vessels that gave the myth its terrifying credibility.
So let's pivot the narrative away from the myth for a second and look at the harsh forensic realities. We all love the thrilling idea of paranormal vanishings and alien abductions where craft just disappear without a single trace. But when a Coast Guard helicopter flies out over this water for a search and rescue op, they aren't looking for mysterious portals. They're battling extreme ocean depths that can swallow a ship whole, alongside brutal, unpredictable weather systems like massive stormy seas, dark clouds, and sudden lightning. The reality? This environment is naturally hostile and deeply unforgiving.
And this leads right into the hard science of the ocean. If a ship goes down, why on earth don't we find the wreckage? Well, it really comes down to the Gulf Stream. Think of it as a massive, incredibly fast underwater river cutting right through the Bermuda Triangle. It actually moves faster than many ships can even sail, transporting just an unimaginable volume of water. If a passenger aircraft or a historic ship meets with a catastrophic accident here, the Gulf Stream acts like a giant conveyor belt. Within mere hours, it can rapidly sweep floating debris and wreckage miles away before search teams even have a chance to arrive.
So the crucial point is that when you combine magnetic variation with violent weather systems, you create the perfect storm for fatal human error in navigation. Let me explain. Magnetic variation is a vital scientific fact. It's the natural difference between true north and magnetic north. In the area of the Bermuda Triangle, this variation can be highly pronounced, leading to incredibly dangerous compass errors if a navigator isn't carefully compensating for it. Just imagine piloting a ship or a plane into a violently stormy sea with large ocean waves, and suddenly your compass starts lying to you. It's a recipe for absolute disaster.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the mystery didn't grow from new evidence, but rather from media hype inflating the legend across different platforms over time. You see, the mystery didn't grow because investigators were finding new, inexplicable clues. It grew because of a compounding media hype machine. It started with sensational books in the 1970s that packaged these tragedies as paranormal events. Then television specials beamed the mystery directly into millions of living rooms. Actually, it didn't stop there. Hollywood movies dramatized the terror for the big screen, And finally, internet conspiracies amplified those sensationalized stories globally. Step by step, the legend inflated, moving further from verified historical facts and way deeper into pure fiction.
Which brings us to our final, lingering question. We've looked at the vast boundaries, the extreme weather, the Gulf Stream, magnetic variations, and of course, human error. The verified historical evidence heavily points to incredibly tragic but entirely natural disasters. Yet, if science explains most of these disappearances, why does the Bermuda Triangle still capture the world's imagination? Well, we love the thrill of the unknown, don't we? We crave a world that is still a little bit magical and mysterious. Next time you hear a wild theory, think about how easily a great story can overshadow a tragic, scientific reality.
Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're taking on one of the world's most enduring maritime mysteries and treating it just like a cold case file. We're heading out into the deep sea and the storm clouds of the Atlantic to examine the Bermuda Triangle. Our mission here, it's simple. We're going to separate the hard, verifiable, scientific facts from decades of, frankly, wild fiction. We'll look at the actual evidence behind legendary stories like the disappearance of Flight 19 or the vanished USS Cyclops, just to see what's really happening out there on the water. Here's our roadmap for this investigation. We'll cover 1. The mystery returns, 2. Plausible scientific theories, 3. Popular myths and fringe ideas, 4. Modern oceanographic research, 5. The psychology of mystery, and finally, 6. The final verdict. So, starting with part 1, the mystery returns.
You know, for decades, the Bermuda Triangle has held this terrifying reputation as a treacherous stretch of the Atlantic Ocean. It's known as this place where massive ships and commercial planes just vanish into thin air. Take the USS Cyclops, for example. It was a massive Navy ship that disappeared without a single trace back in 1918, taking over 300 crew members with it. Or think about Flight 19. That was a group of 5 torpedo bombers that vanished during a totally routine training flight in 1945. And then, shockingly, the search and rescue plane sent to find them disappeared too. These stories, where absolutely no wreckage or survivors were ever found, created this incredibly compelling narrative of sudden, unexplained loss. It shocked the world, and honestly, it birthed an absolute legend.
Moving right along to part 2, plausible scientific theories. Let's look at the actual prime suspects. Our first prime suspect is the methane hydrate theory. Now, this is a seriously fascinating scientific concept involving violent underwater gas eruptions. The idea here is that deep beneath the Atlantic, massive deposits of trapped methane gas suddenly erupt from the ocean floor. They rush upward toward the surface in this giant, turbulent plume. The physics behind this are completely plausible. If a massive bubble of methane gas erupts, it essentially aerates the surrounding water, kind of like shaking a soda can, and that drastically lowers the water's density. A ship caught right above that eruption would instantly lose its buoyancy and drop like a stone to the ocean floor with zero warning. But when we weigh this really cool concept against actual scientific evidence, oceanographers point out a pretty fatal flaw. These geological events are exceedingly rare, especially in this specific part of the Atlantic. So while it's physically possible, it's highly, highly unlikely to be the main culprit behind all these regular disappearances over the last century. Okay, so another major suspect involves invisible forces, magnetic anomalies. There's been this long-held belief that strange variations in the Earth's magnetic field inside the triangle cause compasses to go completely haywire. This theory heavily leans on reports from incidents like Flight 19, where pilots famously reported their compasses spinning wildly, allegedly sending seasoned aviators and ship captains drastically off course until they were hopelessly lost at sea. And look, while there is documented evidence of compass spin and localized magnetic deviations, it's just not the unsolvable death trap the legends make it out to be. The real story here simply comes down to human adaptation and modern training. Aviation experts and navigators are rigorously trained to easily correct for the difference between magnetic north and true north. It's a known, totally manageable navigational hurdle. Countless pilots and captains account for this successfully every single day when crossing this exact airspace. So when we strip away the highly theatrical theories, what are we actually left with? Well, we're left with highly plausible and often devastating realities. We're talking about massive, towering rogue waves. These things can reach up to 100 feet tall and can literally snap a huge vessel in half in a matter of seconds. We're also talking about the incredibly violent, unpredictable, extreme weather that is characteristic of the Atlantic, which gets completely exacerbated by the swift, turbulent currents of the Gulf Stream. When you combine those terrifying natural hazards with basic human error, deadly navigation mistakes in zero visibility, or sudden mechanical failures out in the middle of vast ocean, well, that simple, tragic combination firmly accounts for the vast majority of historical maritime and aviation incidents. But that brings up a really fascinating question. If extreme weather, the Gulf Stream, and simple human error perfectly explain these tragic sinkings and crashes, what sparked all the extraordinary supernatural claims in the first place? That takes us to part 3, popular myths and fringe ideas. Welcome to the Hollywood version of the Bermuda Triangle. We've got stories of aliens systematically abducting aircraft mid-flight. We have the lost city of Atlantis using ancient crystal energies to pull ships under, spontaneous time portals altering physics, giant sea monsters, and just, generalized malevolent paranormal activity. Now, we have to impartially report that these are entirely speculative ideas. While they make for incredibly entertaining television and wildly successful sci-fi novels, they are absolutely not supported by any strong scientific or investigative evidence. So, setting aside the sea monsters and paranormal activity, another huge question naturally pops up for us. Stepping entirely away from the myths, what is the actual state of our knowledge right now, today? How do we monitor this space in the modern era? Let's explore that in Part 4, Modern Oceanographic Research. See, modern science hasn't just casually observed the triangle. It has completely illuminated it by building this continuous wall of safety around the region. First, we now have ultra-realistic satellite monitoring, keeping a watchful eye on the Atlantic 24/7. Second, combine that with advanced oceanography and pinpoint weather forecasting, we can now predict storm clouds and deadly rogue wave conditions long before ships ever enter them. And third, add in vastly improved navigation technology and modern aviation safety protocols, and the picture becomes crystal clear. Researchers today know exactly what's happening in this airspace and on the ocean surface at any given second. They've effectively demystified the entire region. Moving to Part 5, the psychology of mystery. Okay, so if modern science and technology have completely solved the physical mechanics of the area, the real question is, why does this legend persist so stubbornly? Ultimately, it comes down to human psychology. Our brains are uniquely wired to love a mystery, right? We actively seek out patterns where none actually exist. And this natural inclination is heavily aided by immense media influence, gripping, highly dramatized survivor stories and cinematic documentaries that deliberately amplify the unknown. The Bermuda Triangle remains a cultural fixture not because of what actually happens there, but because of how much we inherently love talking about what might happen there. Which brings us to Part 6, the final verdict. When we finally close this case file, scientists and maritime historians broadly agree extreme weather, catastrophic rogue waves, and human error are the real, true culprits. Remember, the Triangle is a heavily trafficked region for both commercial shipping and vacation and cruise lines, so just statistically speaking, tragic accidents are bound to occur. What actually remains uncertain are simply the exact granular details of unrecovered historical wrecks from decades past. We might never know exactly what mechanical failure struck a specific Navy plane in 1945, or why the USS Cyclops went down in 1918. But we do know for sure it wasn't a time portal or a sea monster. It's just these few isolated historical uncertainties that give the myth enough oxygen to stay alive today. So, is the Bermuda Triangle truly mysterious? The science firmly says no, but human nature ensures the legend will definitely continue. I'll leave you with this final provocative thought. In an age where satellites can map the deep sea and track a storm cloud down to the exact minute, is our human desire to believe in the impossible simply stronger than our willingness to accept the ordinary truth? Thank you so much for exploring the evidence with me.